The morning mist clung to the cemetery like a ghost refusing to leave, and Evelyn Carter walked through it with the same heavy steps she had taken every day for the past 3 months. Her son, Daniel, lay beneath the cold earth, his gravestone, too fresh, too sharp against the softness of the fog. She knelt, brushing her fingers over the engraved dates, too few years, too much grief, and placed a single white rose beside the stone. "I miss you," she whispered, the words swallowed by the silence. It was always the same ritual: the rose, the tears, the unbearable weight of unanswered questions. The police had called it an accident, a hit and run on a rainy night, no witnesses, no justice. But Evelyn's heart refused to accept it. Daniel had been careful, always texting her when he was out late. That night, there'd been no message. Today, though, something was different. As Evelyn stood to leave, a flicker of movement caught her eye. A girl, small, hunched in a black hoodie, darted between the trees near the edge of the cemetery. Evelyn froze. The girl paused by Daniel's grave, her head bowed, then placed something on the stone before vanishing into the mist as quickly as she'd appeared. Heart-pounding, Evelyn hurried forward. A folded piece of paper, damp from the morning air, lay against the granite. Her hands shook as she opened it. The words, scrawled in hurried pencil, stabbed through her. "He didn't die by accident. He died protecting me." The world tilted. Evelyn's breath came in sharp gasps as she read the line again, then again, as if the words might rearrange themselves into something that made sense. But they didn't. They screamed a truth she wasn't ready to face. Who was this girl? What had Daniel been protecting her from? And if his death wasn't an accident, then who had killed him? The wind howled through the trees, carrying no answers. But Evelyn knew one thing. She wouldn't leave this cemetery today with only a rose. She'd leave with a mission. Evelyn's hands trembled as she clutched the note, the words burning into her mind like a brand. The cemetery, once a place of quiet sorrow, now felt charged with danger, as if the trees themselves were whispering secrets she wasn't meant to hear. She spun around, scanning the mist for any sign of the girl, but the figure had disappeared, as though she were nothing more than a ghost. A phantom who had come to deliver a message and then vanished back into the shadows. Evelyn's heart hammered against her ribs, her thoughts racing in frantic circles. Protecting her? From what? From who? The questions gnawed at her, each one more terrifying than the last. She had spent months drowning in grief, believing her. Son's death was a cruel twist of fate, but now she wondered if it had been something far darker. She stumbled back to her car, the note crumpled in her fist, her mind replaying every detail of the last weeks before Daniel's death. Had there been signs? Had he been afraid? She remembered the late-night phone calls he'd taken outside, the way he'd sometimes flinch when a car backfired, the way he'd started locking his bedroom window, something he'd never done before. At the time, she'd dismissed it as normal behavior. But now, every memory felt like a clue she'd been too blind to see. The drive home was a blur. Evelyn barely registered the streets passing by, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. When she finally pulled into her driveway, the house loomed before her, empty and silent, a shell of the home it had once been when Daniel was alive. She marched inside, straight to his room, which she had kept untouched since his death, as if preserving it might somehow bring him back. Now, she tore through it with a desperate urgency, searching for anything. A journal, a hidden note, a name that might explain what had really happened to him. She yanked open drawers, flipped through textbooks, and even pulled back the rug to check for loose floorboards. Nothing. Then, as she reached under his mattress, her fingers brushed against something cold and smooth. A flash drive, tucked away like a secret. Her breath caught. Daniel had never mentioned it. Why would he hide it? Hands shaking, she plugged it into her laptop. The screen flickered to life, revealing a single folder labeled ES. Inside were dozens of files, photos, videos, and documents. The first image made her blood run cold. It was a surveillance shot of a young girl, her face partially hidden by a hoodie, but her eyes wide with fear. The same girl from the cemetery. And scrawled across the bottom of the photo was a single, chilling line. "They're watching her. If they find out she knows, they'll kill her too." Evelyn's stomach twisted. Her son hadn't just died in an accident. He had been murdered. And the girl in the photo, the girl who left the note, was the key to uncovering the truth. But one question screamed louder than all the others. Who were they? Evelyn's fingers hovered over the keyboard, her pulse roaring in her ears as she clicked through the files on the flash drive, each one pulling her deeper into a nightmare she never knew her son had been living. The photos showed the girl, her, face gaunt, her eyes hollow, taken from a distance, as if Daniel had been following her without her knowing. There were timestamps on the images, all within the last 2 months before his death, and locations tagged across the city. Alleyways, bus stops, the back entrance of a rundown diner. Then came the videos, grainy, shaky clips of the girl speaking, to someone just out of frame, her voice barely above a whisper. "They're getting closer," she said in one, her hands trembling as she shoved a crumpled envelope into her pocket. "If they find out what I took, they won't just come for me. They'll come for you, too." Evelyn's breath hitched. Daniel's voice responded off camera, low and urgent. "Then we make sure they never find it." The video cut off abruptly, leaving Evelyn staring at the frozen image of the girl's terrified face. She dug deeper, opening a document titled List, only to find rows of names, half of them crossed out in red. At the top, in bold letters, was a single word: Witnesses. Her stomach dropped. Was this why Daniel had been killed? Because he and this girl knew something they weren't supposed to? Because they had evidence someone wanted buried? A sudden noise from downstairs made Evelyn jerk upright. A creak of the floorboards, too deliberate to be the house settling. Her blood turned to ice. She snapped the laptop shut, clutching the flash drive in her fist, and listened. Silence. Then another creak. Someone was inside. She moved on instinct, shoving the drive into her pocket and grabbing the heaviest thing. Within reach, a metal bookend from Daniel's shelf, before stepping silently toward the door. The hallway was dark, the only light coming from the dim glow of the street lamp outside. She held her breath, pressing herself against the wall as footsteps echoed from the kitchen. Slow, methodical, searching. Then a voice, gruff, unfamiliar. "Check upstairs. He might have hidden it here." Evelyn's mind raced. They were looking for the flash drive. They knew. And if they found her with it, she'd end up just like Daniel. She had one chance. Slipping into the bathroom across the hall, she locked the door and yanked open the window. The drop to the backyard wasn't far, but the ground was slick with rain. She didn't hesitate. Climbing onto the ledge, she lowered herself down, her shoes hitting the mud with a soft splash. She didn't look back as she sprinted toward the fence, vaulting over it just as a shout erupted from inside the house. They'd seen her. Now she had two choices: run and hide, or find the girl from the cemetery, the only person left who knew the truth, and Evelyn was done running. The cold night air burned Evelyn's lungs as she sprinted through the back alleys of her neighborhood, her mind racing faster than her feet. The flash drive weighed heavy in her pocket, a ticking bomb of secrets that had already cost her son his life. And now it had painted a target on her back. She ducked behind a dumpster, pressing a hand to her mouth to stifle her ragged breaths as the sound of pursuit echoed behind her, heavy boots slamming against pavement, voices barking orders into radios. They weren't just random intruders. They were organized, relentless, professional. The realization sent a fresh wave of terror through her. Who were these people? What had Daniel gotten himself into? Her fingers clenched around the drive. The girl from the cemetery was her only lead. But how could she find someone who didn't want to be found? Then she remembered. The diner. One of the tagged locations in Daniel's files was a rundown diner on the edge of the city, a place called Maggie's. It had shown up in multiple photos, always in the background, as if the girl frequented it. It was a long shot, but it was all she had. Keeping to the shadows, Evelyn zigzagged through side streets until she reached a bus stop, her body trembling with adrenaline as she boarded the first bus heading downtown. The few passengers aboard barely glanced at her, their faces buried in phones or half asleep. She slumped into a seat, her pulse still hammering, and pulled out her phone to search for Maggie's diner. The reviews were sparse, the kind of place people went when they didn't want attention. Perfect. An hour later, the bus hissed to a stop in a part of the city Evelyn rarely visited, where the streetlights flickered like dying stars and the buildings wore layers of graffiti like armor. Maggie's was a squat, greasy spoon wedged between a pawn shop and a boarded-up laundromat, its neon sign buzzing weakly in the night. The bell above the door jingled as she stepped inside, the smell of stale coffee and fried eggs thick in the air. A few tired-looking patrons hunched over their meals, but none of them were the girl. Evelyn slid into a cracked vinyl booth near the back, her eyes scanning the room. Then she saw it. A small symbol carved into the edge of the table, almost invisible unless you were looking for it. A tiny ES, the same initials as the folder on the flash drive. Her breath caught. This was the place. The waitress, a woman in her 50s with tired eyes and a name tag that read Dolores, dropped a menu in front of her. "Coffee?" she asked, her voice flat. Evelyn hesitated, then took a gamble. "Actually, I'm looking for someone, a girl, short, dark hair, wears a black hoodie. She might have known my son, Daniel Carter." Dolores's expression didn't change, but her fingers tightened around her notepad. "Don't know anyone like that," she muttered, turning away. But Evelyn saw it, the flicker of fear in her eyes. She reached out, grabbing Dolores's wrist. "Please," she whispered, her voice breaking. "They killed my son, and I think they'll kill her too." For a long moment, the diner's noises faded into silence. Then Dolores leaned in, her lips barely moving. "Booth 3. 5 minutes. And then you were never here." Evelyn's heart leapt. She nodded, releasing her grip. 5 minutes later, the diner's back door creaked open. A figure slipped in, small, hood drawn up, hands shoved deep into pockets. The girl from the cemetery. She slid into booth 3 without a word, her eyes darting to Evelyn's face for only a second before dropping to the table. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. "You shouldn't have come here. Now they'll be watching you too." Evelyn leaned forward, her hands shaking. "Who are they?" The girl's lips pressed into a thin line. Then she reached into her pocket and slid a folded photograph across the table. "See for yourself." Evelyn unfolded it, and the world stopped. The photo showed Daniel, alive but bruised, standing beside a man in a police uniform. A man whose face was unmistakable, the chief of police. And written on the back, in Daniel's handwriting, "If anything happens to me, it's because of him." The diner's fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a sickly glow on the photograph that now felt like a live wire in Evelyn's hands. The chief of police, the man who had personally handed her a folded flag at Daniel's funeral, who had promised her justice, was the one her son had been hiding from. The room tilted, the clatter of plates and murmur of voices fading into a distant hum as the pieces began to snap together with terrifying clarity. The accident hadn't been an accident at all. The lack of witnesses, the closed case, the way the investigation had been swept aside. It all made sense now. The very people meant to protect them were the ones who had destroyed her son. The girl, Elise, she whispered her name like a confession, ducked further into her hoodie, her knuckles white around her coffee cup. "Daniel was trying to help me," she said, her voice frayed with guilt. "I was a witness. I saw him, the chief, take a bribe from a drug cartel. He murdered a detective who was getting too close to the truth. I ran, but they knew I saw it. Daniel found me hiding near his college campus. He said he'd keep me safe until we had enough proof to go public. Her breath hitched. But someone talked, or they tracked us. The night Daniel died, he told me to run. Said if anything happened to him, I was to leave the note at his grave so you'd know it wasn't random. Evelyn's nails bit into her palms. Why didn't you come to me sooner? Elisa's eyes flicked to the diner's door, then back. Because they're watching your house, your phone, your life. The second they think you know, you're dead. She reached into her sleeve and pulled out a crumpled USB drive, a twin to the one Evelyn had found. This has everything. The video I took of the murder, names, payments, but it's not enough. The chief owns half the department. If we take this to the wrong person, it disappears, and so do we. A shadow moved outside the diner's window, a figure pacing near a parked car. Elise stiffened. We have to go. Now. She dropped a $20 bill on the table and grabbed Evelyn's arm, yanking her toward the kitchen. Dolores didn't even blink, as they shoved past the swinging doors into the greasy, steam-filled back room. Out the alley, she hissed, pointing to a fire exit. Turn left, then right at the dead end. There's a blue hatchback, keys under the mat. Go to the address I text you. Don't stop. Evelyn opened her mouth to ask how the girl knew all this, but the roar of a car engine skidding to a halt outside cut her off. A door slammed. Voices shouted. Elisa's face paled. They're here! The fire exit burst open before they could reach it. A man in a black tactical vest filled the doorway, gun raised. Freeze! Police! But the badge on his hip was upside down. Not police. Killers. Elise acted fast. She grabbed a cast-iron skillet off the stove and swung it hard. It connected with the man's temple with a sickening crack, sending him crumpling to the floor. Run! She screamed. They bolted into the alley, the shouts behind them growing louder. Evelyn's heart pounded in her throat as they skidded around corners, the blue hatchback coming into view just as gunshots rang out. A bullet whizzed past, shattering a window above them. Elise wrenched the car door open, shoved Evelyn inside, and dove into the driver's seat. The engine roared to life, tires screeching as they peeled onto the street. Evelyn twisted in her seat. Two men in vests were sprinting toward a black SUV. They're following us. Elisa's hands clenched the wheel. Not for long. She yanked the car into a sharp U-turn, then slammed her foot down, racing toward the freeway and the heart of the city. Where are we going? Evelyn shouted. Elisa's voice was steel. To the one person the chief can't control. The USB drives burned in Evelyn's pocket. The truth was coming. The city blurred past in streaks of neon and shadow as Elise wove through traffic with a reckless precision that spoke of someone who had spent too long running for their life. Evelyn clutched the door handle, her knuckles bone white, every muscle in her body coiled tight as she watched the black SUV behind them gain ground, its headlights cutting through the darkness like the eyes of a predator. The USB drives in her pocket felt like they were burning a hole through her jeans. Two tiny sticks holding the power to destroy lives, topple a corrupt empire, and maybe, just maybe, bring justice for Daniel. But first, they had to survive the next 10 minutes. Elise took a sudden, gut-wrenching turn down a narrow service road, the hatchback's tires screaming in protest as they skidded onto the shoulder. There's a police barricade ahead, she hissed, her eyes flicking to the rearview mirror. Real cops. We can't let them stop us. They could be working for him. Evelyn's stomach dropped. The chief's reach was longer than she'd imagined. If even a fraction of the department was compromised, there was no one left to trust. The barricade loomed ahead, flashing lights painting the asphalt in pulses of red and blue. Elisa's foot hovered over the brake for a fraction of a second. Then she slammed the gas instead. The car lurched forward, barreling straight for the gap between two cruisers. Officers scattered, shouting as they blasted through the SUV still. hot on their tail. A radio crackled to life somewhere behind them, voices barking in chaotic bursts. Suspects in a blue hatchback, armed and dangerous, do not approach. The lie was seamless. They'd just been branded as criminals. Evelyn's phone buzzed violently in her pocket. An unknown number. She swiped to answer, pressing it to her ear. A voice, low and deliberate, filled the silence. "Stop the car, Evelyn, or the next body they find won't just be your son's." Her blood turned to ice. She knew that voice. The chief. Elise snatched the phone from her hand and hurled it out the window without a word. The message was clear. No more contact, no more threats. They were on their own. The skyscrapers of downtown rose around them, glass and steel giants hiding 1,000 secrets. Elise swerved into an underground parking garage, the sudden darkness swallowing them whole. The SUV's headlights flickered at the entrance, then vanished as it sped past. They'd lost them, for now. The car screeched to a halt in a shadowed corner. Elise killed the engine, her breath ragged. "We walk from here." Evelyn followed her through a maze of concrete pillars and dim emergency lights, their footsteps echoing like gunshots in the empty space. An elevator took them up to the lobby of a nondescript office building. All marble floors and potted plants, the kind of place where power hid in plain sight. Elise marched straight to the security desk where a uniformed guard looked up, startled. "I need to see him," Elise said, her voice stripped of all fear. "Now." The guard's eyes darted to Evelyn, then back. "You sure about this?" Elise leaned in. "Tell him it's about the Raven file." The guard paled. He picked up the phone. 5 minutes later, they were ushered into a private elevator, then into an office at the top floor, all sleek wood and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Behind the desk sat a man in a tailored suit, his sharp gaze locking onto them like a hawk spotting prey. Evelyn's breath caught. She knew this man. Everyone did. The state attorney general, the one man with the power to take down a corrupt police chief. He steepled his fingers. "Start talking." Elise pulled the USB drive from her sleeve and slid it across the desk. "Everything you need to bury him is on there, including the murder video." The attorney general didn't move. "Why come to me?" Evelyn stepped forward, her voice raw. "Because my son died for this, and I won't let them erase him twice." For the first time, the man's mask slipped. Something like regret flickered in his eyes. Then he reached for the drive. Outside, sirens wailed in the distance. The hunt wasn't over yet. The Attorney General's office was eerily silent as he inserted the USB drive into his computer, the screen's glow casting sharp shadows across his face. Evelyn stood frozen, her entire body wound tight like a spring, watching as video footage filled the monitor, grainy but unmistakable. The chief of police, his face twisted into a sneer as he accepted a thick envelope from a man in a suit, then turning calmly to put a bullet in the head of a detective who lay bleeding on the ground, begging for his life. Elise's shaky whisper from behind the camera echoed in the room. "Oh God! Oh God!" before the footage cut to black. The Attorney General exhaled slowly, his fingers steepled under his chin, but Evelyn saw the fury in the white-knuckled grip of his other hand. "This is enough to put him away for life," he said quietly, "but we have to move fast. If he even suspects we have this, he'll disappear, or worse, make us disappear." Elise stepped forward, her voice steadier than Evelyn had ever heard it. "There's more. Names, dates, bank transfers. He's been funneling drug money through shell companies for years. Daniel and I were going to release it all online. That's why he killed him." The Attorney General's jaw tightened, and for the first time, Evelyn saw something like hope flicker in his eyes. He picked up his phone, dialing a number with quick, precise movements. "Get me the FBI field office. Now." 2 hours later, Evelyn sat in a secure conference room, wrapped in a blanket someone had handed her, watching through the glass walls. as federal agents swarmed like ants, coordinating raids, freezing accounts, issuing warrants. The chief's face flashed across news screens. Corruption, scandal rocks police department. But Evelyn barely registered it. All she could think about was Daniel. His laugh, his stubbornness, the way he'd always stepped in front of bullies, even as a kid. He hadn't just died in some random accident. He'd died a hero. And now, finally, the world would know. A hand touched her shoulder. Elise stood there, her eyes red-rimmed but clear. "They got him," she whispered. "He was trying to board a flight to Costa Rica." Evelyn pulled her into a hug, feeling the girl's shoulders shake. "It's over," she murmured. But even as she said it, she knew the truth. It would never really be over. Not the grief, not the missing piece of her soul. But for the first time since the grave, since the note, since the nightmare began, she could breathe. 3 days later, Evelyn stood at Daniel's grave again. This time, she didn't bring a rose. Instead, she placed a folded newspaper on the stone, the headline screaming his name in bold print: "Local Hero Exposes Police Corruption, Posthumously Cleared." The wind rustled the pages, and for a second she could almost hear his voice, laughing, saying, "Told you I'd never leave. You, Mom." She smiled through her tears, and for the first time in months she walked away without looking back.
Subscribe and press the bell icon so that you never miss the amazing video.